Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Scotland at 7. It's the 3rd of June. I'm Gordon Ross. On tonight's programme, my guest is Chris McCusker. So, welcome back to the programme, Chris. How are you this evening?
I'm grand, Gordon. Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be back on.
Well, glad to hear it, Chris. I'm going to crack on, first of all, with the coronavirus, and we'll talk about the day's news in a moment. As of 2 o'clock today, a total of 2,057,243 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 1,819,342 have been confirmed negative. 237,901 have tested positive. There are 835 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test. Although not everyone with the virus will display the symptoms, and not all those with the symptoms will be tested. There are 4 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who've died from complications caused by coronavirus COVID-19 infections now stands at 7,674. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 110 were in hospital last night, 8 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 o'clock this morning, 3,305,812 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination. 2,137,618 have had their second dose. Okay, I'm just hearing that we've just got the UK's latest daily figures. 127,812 deaths as of today. And that's an increase of 18 deaths since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals. Now to tonight's main stories. The SQA and Education Scotland are to be reformed. Key national agencies, Education Scotland and ASQA, will be reformed as part of an ambitious plan for Scotland's education recovery. Education Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville said the role, remit and purpose of both organisations will be considered, as well as their functions and governance arrangements. Ms Somerville announced the reforms as she outlined wide-ranging plans for education recovery in the first 100 days of government and beyond. These include investing over £1 billion to close the poverty-related attainment gap, recruiting 3,500 additional teachers and classroom assistants, ensuring every school child has access to the technology they need to support their education, making free school lunches available to all Primary 4 children before extending to all primary school children all year round, expanding free early learning and childcare, and developing provision of wraparound care and after-school clubs, increasing the school clothing grant and the Best Start food grant, providing interim support, including a £100 payment near the start of the summer holidays for eligible children before the formal expansion of the Scottish Child Payment next year. Also offering a £20 million summer programme to help restore the well-being of children and young people, particularly those worst hit by COVID-19. And also by removing the charges for core curriculum activities and music and arts education, along with working with colleges and universities to ensure they remain sustainable and at the forefront of global education and research. Laying out the Scottish Government's visions for its visions and ambitions for education, the Education Secretary said the priority was to continue to deliver excellence and equity despite the pandemic, with the health and well-being of pupils at the forefront of the plans. This next phase of recovery activity builds on almost £400 million of investment committed in this area to date. Chris, this is a good news story. The Scottish Education Secretary has, well, it looks like a root and branch complete review of the entire Scottish education system, doesn't it? And here we're seeing a lot of new support, new jobs being created for teachers and also classroom assistants.
Yeah, it's welcome news indeed. But let's not forget that the SNP government have been trying to increase the teacher numbers for the last 5 years. And it would be a breath of fresh air if opposition parties would recognise that, as well as the fact that the Scottish Government, again, are constantly, talking to teachers as well as trade unions and other external bodies in order to, refresh and revamp the Scottish education system for the benefit of our children.
Why do you think the Scottish Government has particularly focused their attention on children, Chris? Is this the start of a much longer term plan to make sure that the children affected by COVID now are not disadvantaged in the future and that they are ready to take their place in society as they normally would be?
Well, I mean, out with COVID itself, Gordon, you and I are of an age, certainly, when we can remember that our school days seemed rather draconian, to say the least. And I think it's a sign that the government are willing to move with the times, willing to adapt in order to keep abreast with technology, the needs of the further education, and also the needs of the workplace. Because don't forget that these kids who are learning now in school and colleges, universities, they are our workforce for the future going forward. And we need, obviously, a diverse and forward-thinking workforce in an independent Republic of Scotland.
Well, certainly, Chris, children are definitely the future, and I think that has been the subject of several songs over the years, hasn't it? Anyway, unfortunately, we need to move on. And the First Minister has called on the United Kingdom government to extend the furlough scheme for as long as it's needed. Ahead of the rescheduled Four Nations COVID Recovery Summit, the First Minister called on the UK government to extend furlough, to rule out a return to austerity and to prioritise a just recovery from the pandemic, ensuring that the pre-existing inequalities are not further exacerbated by the coronavirus crisis. The Scottish Government is calling for an urgent review of the criteria of entry into the job retention scheme, known as the furlough scheme, so that people who have started new jobs since the 2nd of March 2021 can be furloughed over the summer if required. Consideration should also be given to the impact of requiring employer contributions to the costs of furlough in July, August and September, and to extending the scheme beyond September if this is required. They're also asking for an extension of the Barnett Guarantee, which gives devolved administrations increased funding certainty to cover 2021 and 2022 with a commitment to monthly updates. They're also looking for a process for setting out a business case for additional funding for COVID-19 recovery measures in Scotland and the other devolved nations, where there are disproportionate public health and economic impacts as a result of the virus, and to remove the dependency on decisions about funding for measures in England. Also, additional fiscal flexibilities for the devolved governments, including greater borrowing powers and flexibility to move funding between capital and resource budgets to mobilise funding in the most efficient and effective way. There's also calls for a close operational dialogue between the four administrations about the design and the timing of future COVID interventions from the perspective of public finance implications. The Scottish Government is also looking for confirmation of the long-term approach to the test and trace support payment in England and early confirmation of any consequential funding for the devolved nations. They're also looking for a revision of the entry criteria to the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme to allow those who became self-employed more recently than 2019-20 and other excluded groups to access support. They're also looking at restarting of the UK research and development funding for aerospace, and that long-term capital for supply chains are recapitalised to address the expected £1 billion shortfall due to COVID. They're also looking for changes in VAT to support a green recovery in construction, e.g. the application of a reduced rate of VAT on all renovations, expanding eligibility criteria for this reduced rate, and to include a broader range of energy-efficient products, eliminating VAT on energy efficiency measures. Following the summit, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said the meeting must prove to have been more than just a talking shop. The First Minister said, "We are, of course, willing to work together on the recovery from the pandemic, but the UK Government needs to listen and act on key Scottish Government concerns." Well, Chris, we've heard a lot of the Scottish Government making its concerns known to the United Kingdom Government. In this particular case, on the kinds of powers and the kinds of actions required to try to guarantee that people of Scotland come out of this current crisis with jobs and with businesses which are viable. Surely the British government can't object to this kind of, shall we say, cross-border and intergovernmental discussions.
Listen, make no mistake, this is the one chance that the UK government have got to prove to the devolved nations that we are a conscript of equals. If they do not step up to the plate, treat each individual nation as an equal with parity of esteem, with respect, then pretty soon the electorate will know that the UK government have got the alternative motive, which many in the independence movement know that the UK government don't give two shinies. But at the end of the day, if they are really, really serious about trying to save this union, then they must at least not cave into the demands, but be reasonable to the demands. They have to put the constitutional question to one side, and they have to think about the citizens within their union, because at the end of the day, at this moment in time, we are all UK citizens, and if we're not treated as UK citizens, then Scotland will have the right to determine the fact that we need independence in order to look after our own citizens.
Chris, it's interesting what you said there about the UK there having to put aside the constitutional question. This is something we often hear the British government claiming that the Scottish government should do, is set aside the constitutional question. This is the first time I've ever heard somebody say that the British government should put aside the constitutional question. Do you think perhaps that the expectation at the moment is that this should happen? These are exceptional circumstances, and we now expect the British government, as you say, to step up to the plate and to prove that this union is as they say it is.
Look at the COVID situation on a humanitarian level. There are people dying. 128,000, I think that you were reporting at the start of the programme, Gordon. 128,000 people have lost their lives. 128,000 people have lost their lives during this pandemic. 80 odd people have died today alone. Now that should
18, Chris.
Sorry, 18.
Yeah.
18, sorry, I do apologise. Okay. But that should prick up the ears of any government that has got the will and the empathy in order to alleviate some of the problems that we have in order to save life. And this is where you find out whether it's a real government or whether it's a government that is really, really just ripping the proverbial right out of the whole situation. Because up until now, the Tories have used COVID, and I make no apologies for this statement. The Tories have used COVID as a cash cow for their own party, for their own friends and family to benefit from, and that has to stop.
Well, Chris, I think many people would agree with you on that last point. One other point I wanted to pick up on, Chris, which is that the Scottish Government is obviously worried about COVID returning. Otherwise, they wouldn't be asking for the furlough to be extended for as long as is needed. Do you think, Chris, that the Scottish Government is seeing something in the data which the British Government is either ignoring or hasn't seen?
It's not just the Scottish Government that are seeing something in the data. Today we've had about 835 cases of COVID in the hospitals. Many within the political landscape are talking about a third wave in various countries across the globe. So, nobody can take their eye off the ball on this. And, COVID should be out with the spectrum of being used as a political football. It's become beyond, something to attack one government over another government. Yes, we can say in the round that the UK government haven't covered themselves in glory. It's been well documented that they were slow to act. They were apathetic towards the actual efficacy of the actual virus itself. They were lamentable in some of their actions, of organising, glory days. The pubs are open. Let's all go for a pint routine. The eat out to help out scheme, whatnot, what have you. We need to have hard action, and the Scottish Government have laid out their plan for a sustainable, just recovery. And that actual word itself, sustainable, just recovery, that means that everybody is taken care of as we recover out of the pandemic and go forward. And if I can just come back to the first point, Gordon, that I made, is the fact that the British government, as I say, need to drop the narrative of the Constitution, because we have made it quite plain. And rightly or wrongly, an awful lot of people in the independence movement will be very, very upset about this. I, for one, am with Nicola. The fact that the pandemic is greater than independence, we have to knock that on the head first. And then Nicola said, once we have flattened out and got on top of the pandemic, that's when Scotland will be able to move forward.
Chris, one further point just before we leave the subject. I read a report from one of the medical experts from Public Health England, I think it was, and he was saying that they have been testing COVID patients with the new variant. And one of the things that they discovered is that when they gave these patients with the new variant an injection of blood plasma containing antibodies to COVID, the new variant tried to mutate in reaction to this to try to avoid being killed off. Now, it's well known that coronaviruses themselves, and the most common one obviously is the common cold, use this mutation method as a way of avoiding destruction by the body's defences. Do you think we could be looking at COVID being something like the common cold and we'll have to live with it for the next, number of hundreds of years?
Honestly, from the outset, Gordon, I think it was one of the earliest interventions from Professor Linda Bald. And she said from the outset the fact that we would just need to learn how to live with COVID. And COVID would be, similar to, the winter flu, in mild situations, it could be seen as very similar to the common cold. The flu and the common cold manifests itself differently in people's own bodies, because everyone has got a different DNA, and people deal with infections and various syndromes differently. And some people are more susceptible to it, and some people are more able or apt to deal with it. The old adage of the man flu comes to mind, as the fact that some people seem to be floored, when they're not feeling 100% for about 3 days, and then all of a sudden they're running a marathon or climbing a bend or something like that. So I honestly think for the however long I've got left on this planet, then that's the way that I would be looking at it. It's something that you need to guard against and, be able to live side by side. And I think once that we learn the fact that we have to live side by side with it, it's not going to go away. Then, I think that the sooner we learn to do that, then the sooner the country will be able to move on economically.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much for that answer. And now to Europe, or rather to European citizens. More than 240,000 EU citizens will be able to stay in Scotland. With less than a month to go to apply, more than 250,000 applications have been made by EU citizens to remain in Scotland. The Europe Minister, Jenny Gilruth, has requested that the UK government make a series of urgent changes to the EU settlement scheme, including extending the 30th of June deadline. In total, 263,220 applications have been made by EU citizens to stay in Scotland, with 250,040 concluded. 141,220 people have been granted settled status and 102,000 have been granted pre-settled status. Ms Gilruth is urging the UK government to change the scheme so that the status is granted automatically and successful applicants have the option of receiving physical proof of their status, and for the removal of the 5-year residency requirement for settled status. Chris, you'll probably be aware that the owner of the Wetherspoons chain of pubs recently was asking the UK government to allow more EU citizens into the United Kingdom because he couldn't get enough staff. Here we have the Scottish government trying to make sure that the EU citizens who are already here have the right to remain. Do you think the UK government is likely to relax the rules a little bit, to give an extension to allow those already here to make their applications in good time?
Well, I'm really hoping that the UK government do. Earlier on, we were talking about the fact that it's time that the UK government stepped up to the plate and actually, proved their intentions, to qualify the fact that we are a union of equal nations. My remarks to the owner of Wetherspoons, I will keep to myself. If I was left with the choice of drinking water out of a dry sand shoe or going into one of his hostelries, I would take the dry sand shoe every time and twice on Sundays. The man is an absolute clown. He championed the benefits of Brexit, and now all of a sudden, because his company is on the brink of collapse, some of his pubs can't even open because he doesn't have the European workers that actually ran his pubs for him. Then I'm sorry, but crocodile tears just don't cut it. Ian Blackford made a wonderful point last week on BBC Politics. The fact that there are, real independent, family-run Scottish hotels that rely on the tourist and tourism trade, and they desperately rely on the sessional European workers that gladly come over to Scotland because they feel so welcome and so valued. And this is yet another necessary tool in the box for Scotland to be able to use the powers of migration for our own recovery through COVID that we were talking about earlier on. It's not a one solution fix all. There are many facets in order to attain that just recovery through COVID, and migration is just one of them. And again, I'll go back to the fact that if the UK government want to act like the adults in the room, then they must stop their petty squabbles about the Constitution and actually deliver the powers necessary now to the Scottish Government in order that we can actually do something with their, actually formulate a migration policy that benefits all of the Scottish economic landscape going forward throughout this pandemic.
Chris, it's something to what you're saying here is interesting, because what you're putting forward is the idea that if the United Kingdom were to come some way towards the Scottish Government, the Scottish Parliament, in its request for these extra powers and for the ability to do these things, then surely the Union would be a lot more secure, wouldn't it? I'm surprised that it hasn't occurred to the UK government before now to do this.
Well, it's. I would have thought it's good business sense. You, in your personal capacity, run your own business. And a previous manifestation, I ran my own aerial and satellite business, and it makes good fiscal policy in order for you to, speculate to accumulate. At the end of the day, if the UK government devolve the powers of migration to Scotland in order for the Scotland tourist economy to thrive and give a better return to the UK government as we do, if they don't, then they're only going to get a paltry sum in the short to long term. However, if they speculate to accumulate and give Scotland the powers over migration, where we have got enough people, not just for the tourist industry, but also for our health service, also going forward, jobs in demand in the renewable sector, and we can pull from the wealth of talent from our European brothers and sisters, then obviously it's going to benefit the UK Union in the long term. If they look at this through their Brexit glasses, then the returns are going to be comparatively smaller than what they could actually get out of a country that is looking to diversify and being able to utilise the best of its wealth going forward.
Thank you, Chris. Just before we leave this subject of European nationals coming to the UK, it just occurred to me that during Brexit, in the initial stages of it, many UK companies decided that they wouldn't be able to stand Brexit and were actually encouraged to relocate to the continent, taking the jobs with them. Is there, do you think, a possibility here that the UK could actually encourage some of these companies to come back and maybe relocate here in Scotland if there is a separate immigration policy for Scotland? Is there a realistic chance of maybe recovering some of these jobs?
Yeah, and it's a direct play to Rishi Sunak, as the fact that yes, he's got to extend the furlough for as long as it's needed in order that the companies that are operating now can invest in the future going forward, and also be able to invest in their employees so that they have a benefit of sound knowledge, knowing that the furlough will kick in if we actually are unfortunate enough to go into a third wave, that these companies will be able to come through and still be able to operate going forward. Not all companies are directly impacted by COVID, as we've been able to see. Obviously a vast majority of companies rely on one-to-one personage, and they're not able to operate when the virus is prevalent. But the companies that have been able to diversify onto the devil in the room, which is the internet,
yep.
And been able to use and utilised delivery companies
Yeah.
in the last couple of years. We've seen the rise in the need for just delivery, just-in-time delivery sector, which is manifested within the gig economy. That obviously needs to be maintained. So again, I appeal to the UK government to be the grown-ups in the room, think about the economic benefits that, if we are a union of equals, not only Scotland, but Wales and obviously Northern Ireland, think about what those three components actually deliver for the UK union as a whole, for the economy. I'm trying to avoid using the word for the greater good, because it always reminds me of that film. With Sean, what's his name? Hot Fuzz. That's what it was. What it was. But yes,
it's for the greater good. I remember that line.
It is for the greater good. And as I say, this is their chance to step up to the plate. And if they don't do it, then, by the timescale set out by Nicola Sturgeon, that, once COVID is, in a relatively easy way to manage, then, she will then restart the machinations that are needed for Scotland to be an independent country.
Well, we shall wait and see, Chris. Anyway, let's move on now. The United Kingdom government is holding back Scotland's £5.2 billion renewables sector. New research has revealed that Scotland's green energy sector contributes £5.2 billion every year to the economy and employs 22,000 people. But previous studies have shown the UK government are holding back Scotland's renewables industry with extortionate costs. The Fraser of Allender Institute showed that the renewable sector produces 97% of Scotland's electricity and is a vital part of Scotland's economy, but supporting jobs in other industries as well, such as construction and manufacturing. However, Tory energy policies are holding the industry back by charging astronomical prices for companies to access the infrastructure needed to distribute the energy they produce. This opens the UK market to importing cheaper energy from Europe, jeopardising thousands of jobs in Scotland. A study earlier this month by Renewables UK showed how energy producers in Scotland face the highest charges in Europe to access the national grid and export to Europe, with the north of Scotland facing a £7.33 per megawatt hour charge, whilst a number of European countries pay a fraction of that or nothing at all. Because this is something I think many people in Scotland now know about, that Scottish renewables generators are charged a vast fortune to export the electricity which flows through the national grid freely to other parts of the UK. Now, surely, electricity doesn't need to be loaded into a truck and driven all the way to London. It flows down cables. There's nothing to stop it. It moves at the speed of light. Why are they charging us £7.33 per megawatt hour?
Because they are not acting like the adults in the room, and they are, for want of a better word, living up to their name of self-servitives. The graphic that you put out last week when I was on the programme with Neil Gray, MSP, was absolutely wonderful, because it showed the charges throughout the Britain and in Europe, and and it is unequivocal the fact that Scotland is charged the highest per capita out of all those European countries. So it's absolutely madness to think that even now, the UK government, in one hand, I actually heard that what's his name? I'm trying to remember it. Michael Gove. I was going to call him what I normally call him, a loathsome little, but that's neither here nor there. I heard him today espousing the fact that the union is vibrant, and there is cooperation there, and we all work together. Well, if the cooperation is there and we're all working together, I'm sorry, but why is Scotland still being shafted to the tune of £7 odd for our natural energy that we put into the national grid? At the end of the day, in an independent Scotland, that would only go to a Scottish national grid. And if it went down south, it would be charged. And I would hope that it would be charged accordingly for the years that Scotland have actually been shafted. So, it works both ways. And again, we're not going to have many Tories tuning into this channel, unfortunately. But I appeal again for them to be the adults in the room, wake up to their mistakes, and let's move forward. Forget the constitutional question, and let's move forward through the pandemic and see what happens after that.
Well, Chris, we shall just have to hope that the British government actually sees this as a way of perhaps seeing off the threat of independence if they start with an outbreak of pure reasonableness and equality, which I think is probably very unlikely at the moment. Anyway, let's move on. And the Greens have called for the Scottish Government to press on with creating a national energy company. At First Minister's questions today, the Scottish Greens called on the Scottish Government to press on with creating a national energy company as a key part of establishing a green recovery. Analysis by the Trades Union Congress published this week has shown that the UK is lagging behind the other G7 countries when it comes to investing in a green recovery and job creation. The Green Scottish co-leader Lorna Slater used First Minister's questions to press First Minister Nicola Sturgeon to push for green investment from the UK at this afternoon's Four Nations Summit. She also asked the Scottish Government to do more with the devolved powers, including moving ahead with the creation of a national energy company so that it can provide demand for the Scottish renewable, Scottish renewable energy. Lorna Slater, MSP, said, "I hope the First Minister uses meetings with the UK Government to demand the investment we need, working in partnership with other devolved countries, just as the Scottish Government did to secure an extension to the furlough last year. But there is still more that we can do here in Scotland with the powers we have to secure a green recovery." Now, on the back of what we were just talking about, Chris, Lorna Slater's come out and reminded everybody of something which the SNP had promised they would do, hadn't they, at one time? That they were going to create a new Scottish renewable energy company at some point in the future. Perhaps now is the time.
Well, again, and I make no bones about this statement, but I offer no apologies, certainly not to my party. Lorna Slater, absolutely, her question was wonderful. It was well put. And in her short time as an MSP, I think she has been a great advocate for green renewable energy. It's obviously her sector. It's something that she knows about. And I hope that the Greens really press the Scottish Government and actually make this a reality, because it is all fine, fair and well. And, I think we're all guilty of it, at one point in time or another, and using rhetorical phrases and stuff like that. And, the buzzwords that come out of, government and whatnot, what have you. But, certainly, words like just transition have to be a just transition. And again, there's many machinations and faucets within the way that you can achieve a just transition. It's got to be done through, obviously, on an ethical basis. It's got to be done through, obviously, workers' basis. So therefore, the fact that the workers have to be paid the proper wage, they have to be treated with, again, parity of esteem and respect. All the terms and conditions have to be maintained and adhered to and hopefully advanced going forward. There's all the health and safety aspects to utilising green energy, and the benefits outweigh the fossil fuel industry. If you remember back to the 70s when they were recording deaths on the BBC news channel of oil rig workers, that have been obviously subjected to horrendous weather, and they've been negligent in work practice and stuff like that. Surely green energy would be, better if we're starting from the bottom and working up. Then surely it would be, better managed from a hazards point of view, and also it would be obviously ethically sought as well. So yeah, Lorna Slater, I think, absolutely fantastic, and I keep hoping that she keeps pressing the Scottish Government to do what they promised to do a couple of years ago.
Chris, just before we leave this subject, there's one thing that has always puzzled me about the idea of this Scottish renewable energy company, and that's what kind of company will it be? Are we talking about making the entire industry publicly owned and nationalising it? Or are we talking about a sort of government agency which buys energy on bulk at a low price and then sells it on to the public? Do you know which model the government is thinking of?
It could be one of the two, to be honest with you, Gordon. We could make it a publicly funded company to start with initially for, I don't know, a 5 or a 10-year period, and then going forward, we could either put it into stocks and shares. Obviously, I'm not happy with that method. But again, it is entirely for the Scottish people to decide, because it will be owned by the Scottish people first and foremost. And I know an awful lot of people will be kind of like, oh no, not another consultation. Oh no, not another referendum. Oh no, not another. We have to go to the ballot. But in order to enact a real proper democracy that consults with the citizens of the country, these things are necessary, and they could be done through a national assembly. They could be done, without going through the inner machinations of Parliament and stuff like that. A People's Assembly could actually be able to decide various things in an independent Scotland going forward, which has obviously a direct impact on community life, social life, and obviously the economic well-being of the whole country going forward.
Okay.
In harmony to many other Nordic countries as well.
Okay, Chris, I'm sorry, we'll have to move on to a next story. And the High Court has ruled that the UK government housing asylum seekers in Napier Barracks was unlawful. 6 asylum seekers have won a legal challenge against the government after a judge ruled that accommodation in controversial barracks failed to meet minimum standards. The court found that Napier's Barracks in Folkestone, Kent, proved inadequate accommodation for asylum seekers, and that the Home Secretary's process for selecting people to be accommodated at the site was flawed and unlawful. It also found that residents of the barracks were unlawfully detained under purported COVID rules. The ruling prompted calls for the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, to close the barracks immediately. Commenting on the High Court, the SNP's Shadow Home Secretary, Stuart MacDonald MP, said that the Home Secretary blatantly ignored public health advice and put hundreds of people in danger, the very people she is tasked with looking after, and yet another example of how the Tories treat the most vulnerable in society. Mr MacDonald said that despite Priti Patel being responsible for enforcing COVID regulations and advice, she knowingly ignored the advice of her own government, has been urging the rest of the public to follow for over a year now, making a mass COVID outbreak inevitable. Mr. MacDonald called on Priti Patel to scrap the hostile environment, including the disgraceful immigration raids, detention centres, the NRPF, and her proposals to increase reliance on old army barracks and other similar facilities for housing asylum seekers. He said that Scotland has made it clear it wants better than this. Chris, this is bad news for Priti Patel, but very good news for asylum seekers.
It's great news for asylum seekers. I welcome the court findings, but I have to take issue with one of the words that you used there, Gordon, which was unlawful. And I would actually go a step further, and I would say that it was inhumane for these people to actually be housed in these barracks. There was no electricity, there was no running water, there was no sanitation. There was no advocacy to legal representation, and these people were basically put into those disused barracks, and I use the word in inverted commas, disused, as in neglected, as in forgotten about by the British Army, no longer in use, surplus to requirements, and what galls me is the fact, and I have to point this out, is the fact that Priti Patel has said that this ruling in itself will not change her mind. It will not deter her from keeping asylum seekers and migrants in these facilities. She will keep on using these facilities.
Well, shocking story, Chris. I'm sure most of our viewers will be shocked to hear about this. Anyway, let's move on now. And pressure has mounted on Boris Johnson to reverse aid cuts. The SNP has challenged Boris Johnson to immediately U-turn on his shameful decision to slash the UK's aid budget in the middle of a pandemic, as the Tory leader faces a mounting rebellion from his own benches over the cuts. Former International Development Secretary Andrew Mitchell has brought forward an amendment to the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, the ARIA bill. It would force any shortfall of the original 0.7% aid spending target to be covered by ARIA's budget. Around 30 Tory MPs backed the move, including the former Prime Minister Theresa May. The SNP has consistently called on the Tory government to strengthen aid efforts to properly tackle the global COVID crisis. The Scottish Government has already taken steps to increase overseas aid support. Commenting, the SNP's International Development spokesperson Chris Law MP said that the Tory government's deep cuts to the aid budget, hitting some of the world's poorest people and most vulnerable communities in the middle of a pandemic, is deplorable. Chris, I dare say that you would agree with Chris Law's assessment of that particular situation.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. And Chris Law has been immense in his representation on humanitarian issues as long as I've known him. Again, it's not just the impacts of COVID, but obviously the foreign aid impacts on the ongoing pressures that the European and the Middle East has got, with regards refugees, people displaced by war and civil unrest. And it is, actually shocking and telling when Boris Johnson's predecessor is actually advocating for these cuts to be reversed. That just shows you the way that, the actual direction that the UK government are going to, that, their former leader is pleading with them to apply the brakes because they are going a step too far. And all along this programme, I have advocated for the fact that the UK government need to start growing up and being able to demonstrate that they are a government that have got a modicum of humanitarian decency within their, very fibre being, and do the right thing. Because at the end of the day, this impacts in the long term. If they want to stop migrants coming to Britain illegally, then stop it at source and help people in Rohingya, in Palestine, in Calais and Belgium and all the rest of it. Do what is ethically and morally right in the first place.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much for that. Moving on now and to Israel this time. And Benjamin Netanyahu is battling for his political life. The Israeli opposition politicians are set on ejecting Benjamin Netanyahu from office and are rushing to establish a government, as the country's longest-serving prime minister gathered allies for an emergency meeting to strategize how to knock down the fragile coalition. A day after the opposition head, Yair Lapid, announced that he and Naftali Bennett, as far-right partner and prime minister in waiting, could form a government of change in the race, and the race was on to get it voted on in Parliament and sworn in. Netanyahu, facing the end of his 12-year run as premier, said on Twitter, all legislators elected by votes from the right must oppose this dangerous left-wing government, and he targeted historic Arab participation in the coalition. Chris, this is another remarkable story coming from the Middle East, that Netanyahu is, as far as I understand it, he's facing charges of corruption at the moment. And the knives are obviously out for him. But this coalition is an incredibly broad one, isn't it? It goes from the far left to the far right. So is it the politicians are just desperate to get rid of Benjamin?
I am trying to hold back my glee at the thought that Bibi is actually going to be removed from office, which will take away the safety umbrella that he's cowered behind for years, because once he is out of office, then he will be open to judicial litigation for the many crimes that he has committed over his 12-year tenure. So I'm absolutely, ecstatic about that thought.
Chris, is it significant that Arab Israelis, ethnic Arab Israelis, are also going to be included in this coalition for the first time?
Well, yes, and what I was going to go on to say, in the long term, yes, they will. The short term, maybe not. Yahib is a middle. He is. I wouldn't say he's a lefty, and I wouldn't say he's a righty. He's very much a centralist politician. Bennett, unfortunately, is very, very far right, and he is actually going to be prime minister for the interim 2 years of this newly formed government. And that worries me slightly because of his right-wing credentials. However, in saying that, in the future, going forward, as I said, when Yahibi takes over, he is much more willing and open to discussing the way forward in a two-state solution, which is, what the Palestinian people have been craving for all along. They've not been craving for anything more than that. They are willing to live side by side, maybe not in perfect harmony, but they are willing to. Yes, but they are willing to live in relative peace and harmony, and not. They are not asking for more than what they are, originally asking for. Mm-hmm. They are only just asking to be left in peace. And if we have to remember the fact that, even if you look back at maps during the World War II, Palestine was distinctly mapped out, as closest to the sea than what Jordan was. And, we now look at the fact that, that area that was mapped out as Jordanian territory is now encroaching onto Palestinian territory, which was clearly mapped out. Yeah. Even as early back as sort of like 1920, 1930. Yes. So the annexation has to stop. But if that hopefully will secede within the next 2 years going forward, and then when Yahib gets in, then hopefully he will take a more conciliatory approach to the actual two-state solution going forward.
Well, let's hope so, Chris. It would be nice to see some actual progress being made in what has been a terribly divided country, in fact, terribly divided region, I should say, for many decades. Anyway, let's move now to our final story this evening, and investment to support legal aid traineeships. A fund providing up to £1 million to support 40 new legal aid trainees opens today. The government fund will be managed by the Law Society of Scotland and support new talent through the duration of the traineeships. A support package will increase the capacity and capability of the legal aid profession in Scotland by providing employment and training opportunities. It will support full and part-time trainees as Scotland emerges from COVID-19, with awards made on a first-come, first-served basis to firms meeting the eligibility criteria. The funding also aims to increase diversity and equality within the legal profession by the recruitment and retention of trainees from underrepresented groups across the legal profession, including people with disability, from minority ethnic communities, and from socio-economically disadvantaged backgrounds. Applications can be made through the Law Society of Scotland's website, which is at www.lawscot.org. .uk/traineeships. Anyway, Chris, this is another little piece of good news, another little inducement, if you like, to improve things for Scotland's legal aid trainees. I've not heard much actually from this sector about legal aid trainees, and in my case, I was largely ignorant about the fact that legal aid professionals have to be trained, of course. Were you aware that this was an issue going forward?
Well, yeah, funnily enough, actually, a friend who works with Thompson Solicitors, who are one of the biggest trade union lawyers, they had said to me a couple of years ago that they were having great trouble in enticing people into the profession going forward. So again, that's wonderfully intertwines into what we were talking about at the top of the show, with the Scottish Government re-evaluating their approach to education, so that children, school children and students, are better prepared, to actually go forward from their seat of learning, whether it be from school or from university or college, and actually take up an apprenticeship, which will obviously benefit Scotland in the long term. So, I mean, what's not to like?
Okay, Chris. Well, what is not to like indeed? Sadly, we have run out of time for tonight's programme, but just before we leave you this evening, let me just remind you that, of course, we are still holding a major crowdfunder. I just wanted to emphasise something to all our viewers here, that we're very grateful for all your offers of help and support. But right now, we need just a few hundred more of you to put your hands in your pockets to make it possible for us to actually pay a couple of members of staff. At the moment, we're almost there, but we need your help to push this over the edge. We need at least another 100 more regular supporters paying £5 a month. If you can get us above that level in the next month or so, that would be fantastic. If we go further than that, be even better still. But we desperately need your help to keep this channel open. And without that help, we may not be able to keep it going that much longer. Anyway, I'm afraid we are... I've just been reminded we're not on the breadline, but I think the emphasis here is that we need to be able to pay staff, and at the moment we are not quite there yet. We desperately need your help to get that final step, to go that last mile to finish the journey. But anyway, let me just thank my guest, Chris McCusker. Thank you, Chris, for being an excellent guest as usual.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure, Gordon. And again, I'll just echo everything that you've said there. And I would go one step further. If we can't get 100 at £5 at a time, let's get 250 at £2.50 a time.
Well, whatever. Chris, what we need is to get that money over the line, and that extra that extra 100
But
regular
what we need
supporters
is
would do.
more people benefiting from watching news that is pertinent to Scotland, and it's not London centric. And that's what we need people to actually source.
£5 a month is all it costs. It's a fraction of the cost of the BBC TV licence. Anyway, this channel is, of course, always free to view. We don't put up a paywall. We just ask you to help us. So if you have some spare cash and you can afford it, please help us get over the line. Anyway, that's it from here in the studio this evening. My thanks again to Chris McCusker for joining me to discuss today's stories. And I'll see you next time on Scotland at 7. Very good night to you.
How do you mean no more commission?
Well, no one in Scotland can commission an idea. You know, if I went to BBC Scotland and I said, oh, I've got this great idea for a sitcom, I've got this brilliant idea for a drama, you know, there isn't one person in Scotland that can okay it unless it goes through London.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Full Scottish. What's happening today?
Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
That need, that desire for independence is ever stronger than perhaps it was in 2014. So there's an obligation that we've got to give leadership to that campaign. That's what Nicola Sturgeon, as our First Minister, has been doing.
My feeling about Boris Johnson is he can't be trusted on anything.
That is now and forever will be known as the rape clause.
I'm old enough to remember going into Europe in '73, and I remember how much of a razor's edge that was balanced on. And I think we made it by 53%, if I remember correctly, for going in. And ever since that time, England particularly has been pretty much schizophrenic, down the middle about whether it felt British or whether it felt European. And that schism, that crack has remained throughout English society ever since.
Scotland means business. Scotland's voice won't be stilled, it won't be silenced, it has to be heard.
About the work that's been done by Broadcasting Scotland in giving community activists, yes activists, Scottish activists a platform other than the traditional media outlets.